Always, I want to begin by thanking the good folks at TorahAnytime.com for recording this year and making it available to those people who were not able to attend in person tonight. I also, as always, want to dedicate the schus, the merit of the Torah learning that we're about to engage in this evening, for the refuah shleima of Sar Yocheved Bas Chana Masha. Okay, so we're doing Exodus between the lines, and we're in Parshas Va'era, Perek Vav, Pasuk Tes, I was told, chapter 6, verse 9. Let's see what page that's on in your Living Torah Chumashim. Just a moment. Va'era, beginning of Va'era. Okay, so we're on page 283 in the English. Okay, let me open my Hebrew Chumash here. Fine. Okay, so basically we've just finished what were called the Arba Lashonos of Geula, the four different expressions of the redemption. And some hold also that the pasuk Vehevesi Eschem, the verse that preceded this one, I'll bring you to the land, regarding which I raised my hand, that will give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Some hold that perhaps that should be counted among the expressions of the redemption, but it's an ambiguous point, it's an arguable point, which is one of the reasons that we have Elijah's cup at the Seder. I don't know if Rabbi Turk mentioned this last week or not, but there are a lot of different reasons why at the Seder we have Elijah's cup. We have 4 cups for halachic reasons. Each cup, one is for Kiddush Hayom, was like you have to sanctify the holiday like any holiday. One is the cup that's always accompanies grace after meals. Each one has its halachic imperative. Why you should have a cup. Nevertheless, on an allusion with an A, not with an I, on an allusion level, some just call it a homiletical level, we also said that the 4 cups correspond to these 4 expressions of the redemption. So that being the case, it's really of a piece with the other 4 cups that we pour a 5th cup, but we don't drink that 5th cup. That's what we call in halacha hedging our bets, so to speak. All right. Anyone know why our mezuzahs on our doors are slanted? There's a mezuzah on every doorpost, and it's on a diagonal. Why it's on a diagonal?
There's a dispute if it's straight up or sideways.
Correct, because there's a dispute whether it should be vertical or horizontal. So this is the way we compromise. You find such things at times on halacha. No kidding. That's the reason. That's what it's all about.
The Bukhari put them straight up.
Okay.
Yeah.
At any rate, Rashi holds it should be vertical, and Rabbi Tam holds it should be horizontal, and therefore it's on a slant. If I'm not mistaken, this one I'm not so sure about, but I think that this is also why you say Bukharians. I think it's probably all Svardim, I'm straight up. When reading the Sefer Torah, Svardim read their Sefer Torah vertically. They're encased in these beautiful wooden or silver cases. Their bimas are flat tables, and you just set the Torah within its case on the bima, and you're reading the columns vertically. And we have them like kind of on a slant. I think it's also the same dispute whether the Sefer Torah is meant to be read flat or vertical. So, okay, whatever the case may be, there's such a thing. So, coming back to the Seder on Pesach, it's one of the reasons why that 5th cup is called Elijah's cup is because in Jewish eschatology, it's a fancy King James word. Let me explain what it means the first time you've heard it. That's what we call end of days theory. Okay, any study within a religion, within a theology, and within a religious system that concerns itself with the end of time. In Judaism, that means the Messianic era, the ingathering of the exiles of Israel, the resurrection of the dead. That epoch in human history, the last chapter, so to speak, that's called eschatology. So, one of the roles of Elijah the prophet in Jewish eschatology is he is the announcer of the Geula. He precedes the Messiah and announces the coming of the Messiah. That's one of his roles. But another one of his roles, most famously known to yeshiva students who study the Talmud, is that he is the solver of all insoluble, head-scratching Torah dilemmas. Whenever a sugya in the Gemara, whenever a topic in the Gemara, usually a halachic topic, ends with a hung jury, so to speak, we just don't know the answer. We don't know if the halacha is permitted, forbidden. Disputed property belongs to the plaintiff, to the defendant. The thing is pure or impure, and so on and so forth. Okay, those kind of things. So the Gemara always ends with an acronym Teiku. Teiku stands for Tishbi Yitaretz Kushios V'Abayos. Tishbi, the man from Teshev, that's a nickname for Elijah. All right. Yitaretz will answer Kushios, questions, V'Abayos, and queries. So that's Israel. Israel is whatever the head scratch, whatever we don't know the answer to today. In the Messianic era, the Torah will be complete, and in particular, the sage, the prophet, who's going to complete it for us, will be Elijah the prophet. You didn't miss anything. This is just hors d'oeuvres we're doing now. We didn't even get down to the text yet. Relax. Okay, so because we don't know 100% whether or not this expression of redemption should be included in along with the other four. So again, it's one of those nebulous, those gray areas. Okay, in this case, it's a gray area, kind of more homiletically than halachically. Okay, so it's called Elijah's cup. Elijah's cup, because Elijah is going to make the ruling on this cup. That's one of the explanations for why it's called Elijah's cup. Okay, fine. So Moshe Rabbeinu just brought the good tidings. He's talking to the slaves, to the Hebrew slaves, and he's telling them the four different expressions of the Geula. We're on page 283, Elise.
Thank you.
283. Okay, so let's launch right in with verse 9, and just to prove the crime pays, we're going to ask Elise to read verse 9.
Oh, thank you. To verse 9?
Yes.
Okay. Moses related this to the Israelites, but because of their disappointment and hard work, they would no longer listen to him.
Okay. So he related everything you learned last week, the four different expressions of redemption and all that they mean. Okay? Rabbi Kaplan, who always is interpretive in his translations, and probably a lot of my class is going to be taken from the little asterisk that he has next to the word disappointment. Let me tell you the Hebrew words, and let me tell you the very literal translation. It says the Jews did not listen, they did not hearken unto Moses, mikotzer ruach, due to a shortness of ruach, and because of the very hard work. What does a shortness of ruach mean? Now, ruach itself is a word in Lashon Kodesh, in the Holy Tongue, that has two dictionary entries. Okay, a ruach can mean a wind. When applied to a human being, it would mean a breath. The wind that comes out of a human being is breath. Okay, but a ruach can also mean a spirit. Okay, there are 5 elements, according to the Jewish Kabbalists, of human spirituality. They are called respectively nefesh, ruach, neshama, chaya, yechida. Some of these we're very familiar with. Neshama, right? We call a cute kid a neshama, right? We say on a yard site, the deceased person's neshama should have an ascent, should have an aliyah. We know the word neshama, right? But ruach is another word that we very often use when referring to the spirit, right? And it's no great mystery. This homograph, I should say, is no great mystery. Why this word? Actually, 2 out of the 3 words. Neshama also is very much related to both spirituality and to wind. Okay, no great mystery why these words should have a common root, because our theory of human spirituality is that it is a respiration of God. All right? How does a human being get endowed with divinity, with their eternal element, their spirit, what you want to call their spiritual element, their transcendent element? Now look at the Genesis narrative. Yeah. Vayipach ba'apa of nishmas chayim v'yadam nefesh chaya. God blew into his nostrils a breath of life, Some translate it as soul of life, but the word nishmas is that's neshimos. Okay, or that's you better call the vice squad, depending if you hear it at the other end of your receiver. I don't know, but okay, all right. But respiration, breathing. Okay, in particular, it sounds like exhaling is neshima, is a nisham. Okay, very famous and lyrical formulation of the Zohar, commenting on that verse. Uman de nafach midilei nafach. Whoever exhales is imparting something of their being, of themselves. Whatever you breathe out, some of your inner content is coming out with it. That's why we hold that a human soul is chelak alakayim mal, so to speak. It's a scintilla of God, of the living God. Okay. Having said all that, okay, we're not learning Genesis right now. We're learning Exodus between the lines, and mikotza ruach u'ma'avara kasha. They couldn't listen to Moshe Rabbeinu because of shortness either of breath or spirit, okay, and because of the hard work. Okay. Now, when he writes disappointment, he's obviously going along the lines that they couldn't listen to Moshe Rabbeinu because of shortness of spirit. Right? It wasn't something physical, it was something emotional. Okay? A shortness of spirit is a very poetic way of what I might call more modern, idiomatic English, disappointment. My spirit is short today means I'm disappointed, I'm down, I'm sad, something like that. Okay. So, before I share with you what the classical commentaries say on this verse, so I want to invite comment from the class. What do you think of again, you can use either what's written on the page, disappointment and hard work, or shortness of breath and hard work. Okay? And why do you think this would make the Jews a non-receptive audience? That's question number one I want you to consider. And question number two that I'd like you to consider is, are these two different things? Or is this what we call sometimes a poetic repetition? It's just two ways of saying the same thing.
It's a repetition because if you work so hard, working day and night, you're just maybe totally exhausted, out of breath, out of thing. You just leave me alone already.
Okay. Good. Mitch, any ideas?
Not at the moment.
Okay. Anybody else want to offer anything?
Actually, I agree with Ed.
Yeah.
With exactly the same ring. I know when I come home from work sometimes, all I want to do is be a couch potato, and I don't want to do anything. I'm tired.
Right.
So to have
And you weren't schlepping 5-ton stones on your back.
that's right.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah, we can't begin to imagine the backbreakingness of the work of that the Hebrew slaves in Egypt had to endure.
And not even that. And now you're having this person, and yes, they know who he is, but still, he's now all of a sudden coming to you and saying, "I'm gonna be your, excuse the term, savior, and take you out of here." And they're gonna look at him like, "Are you nuts?"
Mm-hmm.
There has to be some disbelief. I think there's some disbelief going on here. Yes, we believe in God, but at the same token, we're here.
Okay. Fred, anything? Hi, Dan. Okay. So, let me first start by saying this: that classical commentaries, that's one of the beauties of the Torah, and one of the things that at least speak to me about its divine authorship, that it's not human authorship, it's like an onion with so many different layers. You peel back one layer of meaning, another layer of meaning, and whereas there's a lot in the Torah, particularly in the Psalms of King David, that sure read at first glance like poetic redundancies, in general, the approach of the oral Torah, whether you're talking the Talmud, whether you're talking the Drashim, is whenever possible, we try to say there are no poetic redundancies. Even though on one level it sounds like a poetic redundancy, we try to alter and make the Torah non-redundant and non-repetitive and squeeze new meaning out of every word and every syllable. Which is why, I think, the translator, Rabbi Kaplan, was obviously trying to avoid that. Disappointment is something emotional, psychological, And hard work is just physical exhaustion. I'm just all in. I'm physically depleted. Yes, what do you want to say?
Is there some kind of correlation between when Moses sent the Meraglim to spy out the land, 12 of them, they came back, 10 gave a bad report. So it's kind of like the same thing. They're not listening to Moses at this point. And, is there anybody there who was not disappointed with what he had to say?
Interesting question. Okay, but let's start by distinguishing. Did everyone hear his question?
Yes.
Okay, so let's start by distinguishing it this way.
Right.
Okay, what is the anniversary of the day of that non-receptive audience? Should know. Tisha B'Av. The red letter, the worst day of the Jewish year. That was the tragedy. In a certain sense, it was the greatest sin the Jews ever committed. All right, even the sin of the golden calf, which is another Jewish fast day, 17th of Tammuz, 3 weeks before Tisha B'Av, right? But they didn't lose the land, and they weren't sentenced to die in the wilderness on account of the calf, even though that seems like a much more heinous crime. All right, this was a big deal. The unreceptiveness of the audience.
Yeah.
Okay, suffice to say that you cannot begin to compare the spiritual status, even though it's the same people, pretty much, essentially. I mean, I'm sure a lot of babies were born, between the Exodus and the sin of the spies, but there were babies at the time. I mean, right? As far as the adult responsible audience, except for the children who would come of age, the boys turning 13 and the girls turning 12, right? Pretty much you're talking to the same people. Nevertheless, we don't have a fast day because of this, right? We have a lot of commentary because of this. We don't have any fast day. There's really no gripe against the Jewish people for being unreceptive at this point. It's really apples and oranges.
Right.
You cannot compare a broken in body and in spirit pre-Exodus Jewry, right, to a Jewry that experienced the 10 plagues, the parting of the Red Sea, the revelation of Sinai, the manna from heaven, the traveling well. You better listen to me by this point. If I haven't established my credibility with you by now, you better be listening to me. Okay, fine. And the other obvious difference is the spies were giving terrible news, and Moshe Rabbeinu was giving incredibly good tidings, incredibly good news, right? Which actually kind of maybe speaks to the same thing, because you had a gullible audience over there. They listened to the majority. 10 spies said bad. They listened to them. The problem was not lack of receptivity. Halavai, they should have been non-receptive there. The problem was too much receptivity. Okay. So that's the orneriness of human nature, is that we refuse to believe. We're incredulous of good news that comes our way, but we're always more than happy to receive, bad news. And I think, they teach that in journalism school. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
You write some good news in the paper, you're accused of being Pollyannish, or worse yet, Sarah Palin. Right. Okay. So, again, let's come back over here. So we see it right away in Rabbi Kaplan's English translation. We're trying to avoid a redundancy over here. We want that Kotz Ruach should mean one thing, one reason why they didn't listen, and Avodah Kasha should be another. So, suffice to say that Rashi, which is the commentary that you always want to start with, right, is accused of redundancy. Okay, and just as Ed said, right, basically all Rashi seems to say is that the Kotz Ruach, he is a little bit ambiguous if Kotz Ruach means that, shortness of breath that way, or again it just means impatience and just I'm all in. But this much he does seem to be clear. It's a function of the Avodah Kasha. When you've got hard back-breaking work, when you've got impatient taskmasters that are pushing you and pushing you and pushing you all day long for over long days. I mean, they weren't unionized over here. This wasn't the 8-hour day and the 40-hour week. All right? So therefore, you have a Kotz Ruach, to which one of the super commentaries, the Gurayes, authored by the Maharal of Prague, jumps on Rashi, and he says, so then it's redundant. So then it shouldn't have to say Mikotz Ruach, just say the cause, and we'll know. The cause for them not listening to Moshe was the Avodah Kasha. The work was too hard, that's why they didn't listen. We can respect our intelligence. We understand how hard work makes for a non-receptive audience. So he says it means two different things. One, he says, is that Kotzer Ruach. What do we mean when we say shortness of spirit? What does it mean when my spirit is short? Okay? You ever hear the expression in English, short-tempered? What does that mean?
Get angry.
Yeah. Our one word in it for me would be impatient. Okay? The Jews were impatient. Okay? They didn't have time for long-winded speeches, even when those speeches seemed to accrue to their benefit. And you want to know why they were impatient? Because they were being driven by impatient masters. When you've got a big oh man, need more fish oil. The memory is going. Oh my gosh, quota. When you have a quota of bricks that you got to produce every day, okay? I remember at the end of the last parsha, they took the emulsifier, they took the straw away from them. They had to go get their own straw and still meet their daily quota, right? So they've got a quota of bricks to produce, and they've got these wicked taskmasters wielding clubs, wielding whips, right? Work. If they're impatient, you're impatient. Okay, the scene probably is, you imagine the Levites, remember, we're not slaves to Egypt, not slaves to the Pharaoh. So Moshe Rabbeinu come, let's go, come and go as he please. But it's not like, this is not the Madison Square Garden. There's not a political rally to the Republican convention or the Democratic National Convention. It's not like he's out there on a balcony addressing 2.5 million Jews. That was by Sinai. That's not what's going on over here. I mean, he's probably going up and down the roads of the slaves as they're slaving, right? Repeating his message. At least that's my picture of what was going on. So of course, what are you talking about? I can't listen to you now. If I pause to listen to you or to consider what you're saying, that's another lash on my back. They were impatient with him because the taskmasters were impatient with them. That's Kotzer Ruach. Right? Avodah Kasha is another thing. Avodah Kasha is sheer physical exhaustion. When you're exhausted, your eyes are drooping. You're trying. You can't multitask when you're exhausted. Right? Can't. Think we'll get to in a minute. But anyway, that's the Guray's interpretation of what these two words mean.
So it's two distinctly different things.
Two completely different things. One is emotional impatience, and one is physical exhaustion. Okay, that's the difference. Chidush Urim says a beautiful thing. Instead of explaining the two different expressions, he basically denies the whole pasuk. He says, "What do you mean they don't listen to him?" He says, "Do you not? You guys were here last week. I wasn't here last week, but I can imagine the kind of Torah the Rabbi Turk said on the four expressions of Gula. These are tidings. This is talk of eternity that Moshe Rabbeinu said. V'yitzesi, v'yitzalti, v'gahalti, v'lakachti. This is. I'm not going to remember that I have a dream speech. I mean, this is the stuff of the ages. What do you mean they didn't hear it? He says, yeah, they didn't hear it. It says they didn't hear it. Do you want to know something? There are times when deaf people can hear too. On some level, it got into them, and it made an impact. And he says a very, very beautiful thing. He says, what is it about us, especially people who come to the Jewish Heritage Center should be able to relate to this. Everyone in their lives, sometimes very, very often, some of us, maybe once a year if we're lucky in Yom Kippur, or when we want to go to see the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem. But almost everyone gets what's called a hirhut tshuva. You get a spontaneous feeling, thought, cognizance of remorse and a desire to mend your ways. Teshuvah, you repent. Okay? All of a sudden, you start feeling guilty about something you never felt guilty about. All of a sudden, you get like this epiphany, you get this thought of, something, I'm living my life the wrong way. Or if it's not that massive, I'm living my life the wrong way. I had this long ongoing dispute with somebody, and I was always 100% convinced it was totally their fault. And now, I'm thinking it over, I'm beginning, maybe I should apologize to them. So I'm thinking it over, maybe, I really don't feel good about the way I treated them either. Obviously, I don't feel good the way they treated me. I don't feel that good about the way I treated them. whether it's between ourselves and God, our relationship with God, whether it's about interpersonal relationships, we get here Hurei Tshuva. Where does that come from? Okay, so I don't know what the psychological community would answer. I'll tell you what the Chidush Rim answers. He says there is a famous teaching of our sages. Shebechol yan v'yan, baskal yoytzeis mehacharev, umachrezes ve'emeres, oy lohem labriyas me'albayna shal Torah. Translation: each and every day, the echo of a prophetic voice. It's called a baskal, a daughter voice. Okay, we know we don't have full-fledged prophecy anymore, but we get sometimes, we believe that there still exists some low-level, reverberations, echoes, if you will, of prophecy. So one of the expressions in the Talmud to describe that phenomena is called a baskal, a daughter of a voice. A prophetic voice is a kol, a baskal, a daughter of a voice. Some kind of an echo, some kind of a reverberation of prophecy. Right? Something, you hear it, it's not clear, but you hear something. Okay? So such a kind of a voice goes out of Mount Horeb. Mount Horeb is one of the nicknames for Mount Sinai, each and every day, and bewails and says, woe to all the creatures because of how they neglect and abuse the Torah. Right? Mount Sinai is the place where the Torah was given to the Jewish people, and we know we're not keeping the Torah and its mitzvahs the way we should be. And maybe this is why it's called a daughter of voice. Maybe it's still echoing that divine voice that we heard by the 10 Commandments when the Torah was first given. Maybe it's still the echo of that voice. So that voice gives the Torah, and the echo, the reverberation, is saying, "But you're not keeping the Torah." So do we hear that? I mean, if anyone would walk up to me and say, "Rabbi, you're not going to believe this. Today, I heard a voice that said, 'Shame on you! You ought to be keeping more mitzvahs.'" Oh, of course, I'm such an effective teacher. Of course, you heard a voice like that, right? No, I'd be calling for a consult down at Bellevue or Willowbrook, right? That's what would be happening. So it's not a conscious voice, right? But what it means that you hear this echo, this daughter of a voice, what it means is that's where it comes from. You don't hear it on an audio level. You don't even hear it on a disembodied voice level. But you experience the reaction to it. When somebody's wagging their finger at you and saying you misbehaved, so if you're not, totally defensive and totally impervious and totally oblivious, you think about it, you consider it, that you did misbehave, you start getting feelings of remorse or feelings of, okay, I'm going to clean up my act. That's where it comes from. The Chidush Rim says, our spontaneous Hurei Tshuva are coming from that reverberation of prophecy that goes out every day from Sinai. And it says, and the same thing happened to the Jews in Egypt. Even though it says they didn't listen, but they listened. On some gut level, a seed was planted. Something in them was already quickened, was already resistant to the servitude and the slavery in Egypt. If we heard the 4 Lashonos of Gula, and maybe there's a 5th Lashon of Gula, the 4 or 5 expressions of redemption coming from Moshe Rabbeinu, despite the backbreaking work, despite the impatience, despite the utter exhaustion, on some level it made a dent. That's what the Chidush Rim says. Yes?
Echo that you're talking about, it recalls to me that every Shabbos when we say the Shemona Esrei, I asked this question once. The last prayer that we say, guard my tongue from speaking evil and let God protect me from my enemies.
All right.
Okay. I know that I commit that sin every day, and that while I'm doing it, I'm thinking, I know I should not be saying this. I know I should not be doing this. And each time that happens, it's like the guilt of doing it. It's very disturbing. It bothers me. It upsets me. But it doesn't stop me. And so if it doesn't stop you, if it's not enough to stop you, it's building, it builds up, and there's a part in the Shema,
Right.
that says, I'll work harder, I'll try harder, but as time goes by and you recognize that for some reason, that's one of the most difficult things for me to stop. And when I say gossip, I'm talking about if something disturbs you, it hurts you,
Right.
and you're going to have a conversation with somebody, and you're in the conversation mentioning a name of someone that did something that upsets you. That is called Lashon Hara, because you're already telling another person
Something negative about the absent party.
And
Okay.
how do you stop that? It's very hard. It's very, very hard. Not because you are bad-mouthing somebody, but because you want to unleash your own frustration, and you need to talk to someone. You need to talk. It's a need. And if you don't talk and you don't, you actually can control yourself to the point where you're not going to speak, I think it's I don't want to say self-destructive, but it hurts you because you need that
Outlet.
right. You need somebody to say. You need somebody to say to you, maybe there's a different way to handle this. Maybe you could, whatever, a suggestion. And it's not, I know it's called Lashon Hara, but like I want to change it, and I want to call it therapy with this type of back and forth, with someone you trust, of course.
Right.
But that's what's coming to mind when you're talking about the echo, because it does echo. It does bother me. I want to be like Superwoman, and I want to say now, just stop it. But
Okay.
And that's as honest as I can.
Oh boy, this is such a loaded question. I don't know if we're going to have time for the rest of the class, but I want to address a few of your points. Okay, factual point number one. There's not just for the Shabbos Shemona Esrei. That's one of the things that's constant in every Shemona Esrei. That part of the prayer. Elokai Hashem is every Shemona Esrei ends with that prayer. The meat of the sandwich differs on Shabbos from a weekday, but that's the same by every Shemona Esrei. That's number one. Number two, while we're on the top of a guilt, just to load you up with a little bit more guilt, is this much I'll tell you, that one of the confessionals that we make on Yom Kippur is Al Chet Shechatan L'Fanecha B'Vidui Peh. You can look it up; it's alphabetical. This is the sixth couplet, the two vav letters, for the sin that we sinned before you, with verbal confession, which there are many interpretations, but the simple baseline interpretation is when our confession is lip service, when we really don't intend to abandon the sin when we confess. So there are some who hold that better not to confess. So first of all, damage control. Maybe you should skip that passage. That's right. Totally right. Okay, but that I'm saying slightly tongue in cheek. But to address your real issue, I'm going to say this. First of all, when you say that with each successive week, when you daven Shemona Esrei and Shabbos, you're feeling more and more guilty, and then you ask your follow-up question is, how do you really stop speaking Lashon Hara? Well, one of the things is, there's guilt, and then there's guilt. There are people with baggage, and there are people with 4 valises, each one of which is 80 pounds overweight. You know what I mean? They're already paying a companion ticket for their baggage, right? Guilt reaches a critical mass in many of us where it compels us to act and to change. And if whatever ways and means you need, to reach that critical mass is good, it's positive. That's part of the tshuva process. Rabbi Yonah, who wrote the book The Gates of Repentance, right, there are 4 gates in the gates of repentance. And the third gate is actually could be extracted from the work and made into its own book, and the book would be what we call the Moneh Mitzvahs, the mitzvah counters. He goes through all 630 mitzvahs of Torah. And he says, what does this have to do with the work on Teshuvah? He says, because the level of guilt has to be commensurate with the seriousness of the sin. Not all sins are created equally, right? And depending on how deep your guilt/regret is, that's how solid and permanent your resolution not to repeat the behavior will be in the future. So I can't just, write a book on teshuvah and let the reader walk away thinking, well, all sins are created equal, and basically, murder and the eating pork is the same thing. It's not the same thing, and it's important for everyone to know the severity of it and to really cogitate on that, because that helps a person get the regret and the resolution that's required to do tshuva. So, in answer to your next question, your first question answers your next question a little bit. How do you get to stop speaking it? You get to stop speaking it by feeling more guilty about it, by getting a deeper understanding of the severity of the sin. And you're saying that you get that just every time you pray to God and say, Elokai Netzal Shani Meira, God, withhold my tongue from speaking to you. That's number one. Number two, brief suggestion, much easier said than done. Start reading the works of the Chafetz Chaim. They're available in English, okay? And the works of the Chafetz Chaim, first of all, detail you in every jot and tittle and every permutation of different types of forbidden speech, the relative severity. Not even every lashon hara is created equal. You're saying if your intent is therapy, it's not as bad as if your intent is vengeance. If your intent is vengeance non-malicious, it's not as bad as vengeance that's malicious. If you're malicious but at least you're truthful, that's not as bad as malicious and making up stuff. There are all different degrees of severity in gossip as well. And not only does he do an unbelievable job, like he needs my approbation, the Chafetz Chaim, of detailing every kind of forbidden speech, he also has many companion works, the most famous of which is Shmiyas HaLashon, Guard Your Tongue, where he gives pep talks about how severe it is and what's going on in terms of busted relationships and ruined careers and ruined marriages and metaphysical things that you can't even begin to see, that he draws on Midrashim and Kabbalah, things that, unless you're a sage like the Chafetz Chaim, you wouldn't know these things about Lashon Hara. So, it's like the graphic ad campaign that's going on now, where they show all these smokers, with emphysema and wheelchairs, with half their faces eaten away. It's graphic stuff, right? But hopefully it's going to scare the young kids who aren't hooked yet. What am I, nuts? This is what I'm going to do? Or if you are a smoker and you've been deluding yourself all your lives, no, it's not going to affect me, and you're beginning to get that hacking cough where it's killing you. You see these ads, maybe it can give you the strength to, okay. Finally, your last thing about therapy, okay, you brought it out in the open, so I'm going to say it to you in the open, okay? You just mentioned the number one and the number two tactics of the Yetzer Hara, of the inclination to evil, in his war against us. You want to talk about destruction? That's destruction. Self-destructiveness is not speaking Lashon Hara. Self-destructiveness is falling sway to the Yetzer Hara, to the inclination to evil, that wants you to speak Lashon Hara. And what do I mean by his number one and number two tactics? This is from the Vilna Gaon. I think I've said it in class before. When the snake, right, who is the original incarnation, the external Yetzer Hara, wanted to entice Eve to sin, what's his shot across the bow? What's his icebreaker in the conversation? Anyone remember? What did he say to Eve? The first thing he said to Eve.
That you won't die? You won't die.
What? No, that was...
Not allowed to touch it.
No. That was the third thing, that was the second thing.
You bring God into the conversation.
Yeah. The first thing is he spoke a slander about God. Second thing was a slander about God. He spoke a lot of slander about God, but the first thing was, I don't know, so much a slander. He misquoted God to manipulate Eve to his... Okay. What he said was, okay, you were told not to eat from any of the fruits of this garden. From any of the fruits of this garden. Implication, God has commanded you to starve yourself to death. The first and foremost tactic of the Yetzer Hara is role reversal. Whereas listening to God is life affirming, and listening to the Yetzer Hara is death affirming, he always tries to put the shoe on the other foot. He says, listen to me. If you listen to that madman God, you're going to die. Okay? He wants martyrs. He wants people to die. you cannot survive on the Torah regimen. That is the first and foremost pitch of the old wily Yetzer Hara. He started it off with Eve, and he does it with every one of us, with every little single test in our life. The first thing is, if you listen to the Torah, you're destroying yourself. That's number one. Okay? Number two always is, okay, what we call Hiras Heter. Okay? Hiras Heter means, I will make you jump through hoops. I'm going to play mind games with you to prove to you that what is impure is actually pure, and that what is forbidden is actually permitted. So, in this case, a little psychobabble, a little therapy, right? You got to get it out of your system. You're going to keep it in, you're going to get an ulcer. You don't want a bleeding ulcer. What, you don't have enough tsuras already? You need a bleeding ulcer too? Speak it out, it'll be good. Having said all that, I want to tell you that here, it may not be total psychobabble, and there actually may be a rabbinic dispensation lurking somewhere in the pages of Chafetz Chaim for such a kind of talk. There is a very broad heter, a very broad dispensation of speaking Lashon Hara called Lashon Hara L'To'eles, evil speech that is for the good. For who's good is again very complex. It's not exactly the same thing, but I'm going to tell you a very interesting law on the laws of Shabbos. The laws of Shabbos state that none of the 39 categories of creative activity are considered a Torah level desecration of Shabbos if they are destructive. Hence, they are destructive. Right? It's oxymoronic. They can't be creative activities if they're destructive. So, if I broil food on Shabbos, I have desecrated Shabbos. If the food was broiled before Shabbos and I continue to broil to the point where it's burnt on Shabbos, I'm not allowed to do that. There's plenty of rabbinic ordinances that say it's not allowed, but that's not Torah level desecration. Okay? Any permutation that I do that is destructive is not considered a desecration of Shabbos. And that's why the intrinsically destructive ones need to be done with something positive in mind. Demolition is not desecration of Shabbos unless you plan on building a new structure in the same place. Tearing fabrics on Shabbos is not a Torah level desecration unless you plan on doing a new seam where you tore it. Erasing is not Torah level desecration unless you plan on writing 2 new letters in the spot that you just vacated on the paper or on the parchment, and so on. That's how it goes. Okay. So, the Gemara says that Hashover Kelim B'chamasei, somebody who breaks pottery in his anger, on the one hand, it's like you worshipped an idol. You're not supposed to get that angry and whatever. I'm not going to go into that's a whole other class, why it's like idolatry. On the other hand, it's not really Chilul Shabbos. It's not considered, if you do that on Shabbos, because it's a destructive act, okay, then you haven't desecrated Shabbos. Says the Tosfos, okay, the Addenda to Rashi, one of the second most important commentary on the Talmud. Tosfos says, not so fast, Paparelli. Don't think that this is a blanket dispensation, to throw crockery against the wall on Shabbos. He says there are times when a person is very angry where it's therapeutic to be destructive. So even though it's not good for the crockery, it's not positive and constructive for the crockery, it's positive and constructive for the person. And that might be a Torah level desecration on Shabbos. So I'm not blowing you out of the water. I'm not saying that you're definitely fooling yourself, but you're probably fooling yourself.
No,
you probably should not be speaking Lashon Hara. Okay.
I want to ask you one thing. What you just said, is that equivalent to if I am aware of the Lashon Hara that I commit,
right,
but I can't control myself not to do it in almost every area,
right,
but this one place that I'm talking about, this one situation or this one area, because this is the one part for me that's very difficult to keep to myself, to not... Okay, so I'll answer you with a Reb Chaim Volozhin. Reb Chaim Volozhin writes on the Mishnah Avos, famous Mishnah Avos says, a person should always engage in the study of Torah and in the performance of mitzvahs, even for ulterior motives. Shemitoch shelo lishma ba lishma, because from within a framework of doing things for ulterior motives,
eventually you'll come to pure motives. He gives a very, very beautiful parable, allegory. He says, imagine that you've got not a wine cellar, but you've got a wine attic. Okay? And you've got the boss, and you've got the wine steward. And he tells the guy, I want you to fetch me a beverage from upstairs, from the attic. Does he expect him to do it without a ladder? What is this guy, Superman? He's going to take one mighty bound, one mighty leap, and go up 2 stories? Doesn't work that way. It's ridiculous to assume that he's not going to go step by step by step by step. That's the plain meaning of this mission. Okay? There is an ascent till we come to totally pure and noble motives. Okay? And we've got to keep on threshing out and winnowing out. We first study Torah because the Rabbi gives us a lollipop or a lick of honey on the olive base chart. All right? Then we're learning Torah for the good mark on the report card because it makes mom and dad happy. And then we're learning Torah even harder, to get the valedictory address at the graduation, and so on and so forth. It becomes more mature. It becomes a little bit more noble, the motivation. But until you really rid yourself of motivation, you've got to go through years and years and decades sometimes of ulterior motives. However, using the same allegory, he says, try to imagine the consternation of the boss if the butler never makes it to the 2nd step, or never makes it to the 5th step. As soon as they get to the 5th step, they retreat to the 4th. Go up the 5th step, back to the 4th. Up the 5th step, after the 4th. And they're doing that for years. And they never come back with the beverage. The boss is going to be pretty upset. He says, yes, we should study Torah and do mitzvahs ulteriorly. Right? But we should always have our eye on the ball. We should always know, I can't stay this way. I must move forward. I must progress. So, when you say that you're pretty good about Lashon Hara and other departments, it's, what? That guy in the 3rd row, that Nazi over there, what? How many years have you been stuck over there? How many decades have you been stuck over there without getting too personal? Right? So, I don't know. Again, I don't mean to be judgmental. I don't know the particulars, and this is not the form ferrying out all the particulars. But in theory, God has infinite patience. Believe me, even with Chaim Volozhin's allegory, God has plenty of patience for the people going step 1, step 2, step 1, step 2, their whole lives. He'll wait till you breathe on last. But ultimately, there's a bit of impatience. Okay? It's time for the next act. It's time. You've conquered so much Lashon Hara, you can do it. If you've got the strength to conquer all that Lashon Hara, you probably have the strength, to conquer this next Lashon Hara too. Okay? That's the Yetzirah speaking.
And it's even in that prayer. It's the part that says, to save me from,
that's right.
Means stop saying everything because you're asking God to save you, therefore there's no need to, right?
Or another way to interpret it is, save me from the one who really wants to destroy me, which is the Yetzirah, who wants me to keep on speaking Lashon Hara. That's really the most destructive thing. Destructive to the person I'm speaking about, destructive to the listener, destructive to me.
But until we just spoke about it, I didn't know what save me from who means.
The Kabbalah calls Lashon Hara Lishna Tlisai, the 3-forked tongue, because it kills 3 people. The speaker, the listener, and the one being spoken about. Character assassination. Okay, let's wrench this back to our pasuk. Again, we want to understand what was wrong with this audience that didn't listen to Moshe. Okay, so let's move away to the other extreme. I was telling you Chassidish Pshat. Now I want to tell you one of the foremost Pashtonim, the Ralbag, Gersonides. It's a very, very fascinating thing to make this into 2 different things. Mikotz HaRuach, from shortness of breath. Ume'avoda kasha, and from backbreaking work. Are they the same thing, says the Ralbag? No. One is the chisaron and the mashmiya. One is there's something wrong with the speaker, and one is there's something wrong with the audience. What's wrong with the audience is they're exhausted, they're all spent. Emotional, physical, really doesn't matter in the Ralbag's shot. The first part of the sentence, mikotz haruach, shortness of breath, is not referring to the Jews, it's referring to Moshe Rabbeinu. We all know that Moshe Rabbeinu, maybe we don't all know, we're going to see in a minute, Moshe Rabbeinu had a speech impediment. Okay? The Ralbag basically understands him to have been a stutterer. Right? That's how he's delivering the four Lashonos of Gula, the four expressions of Gula. Okay? A person can be good-mannered, a person can be compassionate when listening to a stutterer or a stammerer, right? But they're hard to listen to. It's just hard to get the message, especially if the person stammers. So he's understanding that when the Torah says kotzer ruach, a shortness of breath, it really means there was something in Moshe Rabbeinu's breathing that made his speech garbled. Okay?
This is their, though.
What?
This is their disappointment.
Okay, he's not interpreting according to Rabbi.
I don't know what the Hebrew means. But
All it says because of shortness of breath. There's no possessive. In the original Hebrew, there's no possessive. This is only the Rabbi says this. Most of the commentaries learn whether it's a poetic redundancy or whether it's two separate things, it's both referring to the audience. Okay, the Rabbi is a real innovative pshat over here, interpretation, that because it's not said in the possessive, that he has the room, the wiggle room to say that Mikot Zeruach is referring to Moshe Rabbeinu, not to his audience. The Avodah Kasha is why the audience couldn't listen to him. And the Mikot Zeruach is the speaker. He was not a good speaker. It was a hard listen. Yeah, I'm
That's
sorry.
the whole thing. It gets you to you have to put more effort into listening to what he's saying.
And when you've got a physically and emotionally depleted audience,
Right.
that's apparently when you would want a guy with diction, with the King's English, who every word is clear as a bell, feels like a bell. Okay.
But then also God took them on a circuitous route to Palestine, Israel.
I'm sorry, I didn't get the connection there. What about the fact?
There always seems to be more effort than no matter where you are, it's going to be even more you have to put into it.
to get to.
Yeah, I mean, they didn't know at this point that they were going on a circuitous route. Okay. Rabbeinu Bechaya, two things I want to say from the Rabbeinu Bechaya, but the next thing I'll save if we have time tonight when we get to the next pasuk. Rabbeinu Bechaya says that when it says Mekotze Ruach Umavoda Kasha, in a certain sense it is a redundancy, but it's not really the same thing. What it really means is kind of what you start off by saying, right? You just want to be a cash potato, but it goes much more severe on that. Okay, we all know that during the Holocaust there were victims, 6 million of them. There were survivors, and then there were people who were like kind of in between. Okay? Can't say that the Nazis directly destroyed them, right? But neither were the survivors. By that I mean we know that there were people who threw themselves against the electrified fences. There were people who just stopped scraping for rations after a certain point. Right? The pain got to be too much, and they just wanted to end it as quickly as possible. Right? So says the Rabbeinu Bechaya. The Jews in Egypt, when it says in the pasuk that they had kotzer ruach, we just don't just mean the just run of the mill. I'm just so tired now. Can you wait till tomorrow when I'm fresh and tell me what you have to say? That's avodah kasha. That's from too much hard work. Mekotzer ruach means they just want to end it all. They were so depressed and so beaten down. Okay. You go to a Jew in 1942 in Auschwitz, about to throw himself on the electrified fence, and you whisper to him through the fence, "Yeah, you're a Pole, or whatever. You're somebody who made it over to the Aryan side." And he said, "The Allies just stormed Normandy. Okay, just hold out." "No, I can't take it anymore. Leave me alone. This electrified fence is my one solace. Let me throw myself against it. Don't bother me with these stupid, good tidings." That's how the Rabbeinu Bechaya understands Mikotzer Ruach. So over here again, it doesn't mean respiration. It means a shortness of spirit, but not like we learned before, impatience. It just means a nihilistic kind of suicidal, like I've had it. I just need cessation of the pain that I'm suffering this minute, and this is just a distraction. This is just you're spinning me these golden dreams, and they're never going to come to fruition anyway. I just want immediate relief. That's all I want. What you said. There's a process, 4 stages of redemption. I need relief in the next 10 seconds. I can't wait for this anymore. That's how Rabbeinu Bechaya learns it. The Meshech Chochmah says a very, very incisive shat. Remember we started the class, we spoke about Elijah's cup and the 5th lashon of Gula? It's like this. This is again, just to make it more real, more up to date to us. Try to imagine you go to a Holocaust survivor, not in 43, in 45. Okay? The Allies, the Russians just liberated Sachsenhausen, the Brits just liberated Belsen, okay? And you go in there to these Muslim mentions, to these people who weigh 80 pounds, they're 6'4", but they weigh 80 pounds soaking wet, right? They can't keep their food down. There's typhoid raging through the camps. And you go up to them and they say, you know something? I'm a time traveler, okay? You're going to have 5 children, 54 grandchildren, 108 grandchildren. You're going to see them in your lifetime. Okay? It was a true story. A lady, a Holocaust survivor, had a funeral in Williamsburg about 3 months ago. There were over 2,000 descendants at her funeral. She was, I think, 16 or 17 years old at the war's end. But there were over 2,000 descendants at her funeral. She had 15 kids, and all their kids had 15 kids. They had huge families. Right? So imagine if you had gone to this girl, the 16-year-old girl, where I don't know what camp she came out of, and said, you're going to have 2,000, not people attending your Levaya, you're going to have 2,000 of your Yitzhak, people who are going to spring from your loins. Okay? Or, another guy, you're going to hold 20 patents, You're going to be a multi-millionaire. Buddy, can you spare a K ration? What are you hacking me at Shinik? I'm starving. I don't know if I'm going to make it through the next 10 minutes. There were 50,000 Jews. I know prisoners. I don't know if they're all Jews. 50,000 people, I think this is, who died in Belsen after the liberation. After the liberation. That's what's going on. There were never any gas chambers in Belsen. My mother, who was there, told me they didn't need them, right, to do what they had to do. Can you imagine? You go to a person like that and say, you're going to be a multi-millionaire. You're going to have the most wonderful husband and children and grandchildren ever. You're going to build up the best business ever.
It doesn't mean a thing.
Leave me alone. Just come on, get the guy to stop cracking the whip. He says, what they didn't listen to, okay, it's contextual. This pasuk comes right after, not the first 4 Lashonas of Gula, the 5th. Up until the 5th, they could take it. Don't give us no promised land. Up until the 5th expression of redemption, it's all about ending the Egyptian servitude. Ending the Egyptian servitude, that we want to listen to. Get us out from under the Nazis' thumb, that we want to listen to. Everything else, you're a dream weaver, you're spinning tall tales, that we have no patience for. Okay? So again, it's 2 different things. The Avodah Kasha is the Avodah Kasha. They're working hard. But the Kotzer Ruach, the impatience was with the promise of Eretz Yisrael. And he says very beautifully, we're not going to get this far tonight, but take a look, it's on the same page, verse 13. Okay? God then spoke to both Moses and Aaron. He gave them instructions regarding the Israelites, Pharaoh of Egypt, so they'll be able to get the Israelites out of Egypt. Period. No more talking about Israel. That was overreaching. The second time God commands Moshe and Aaron to speak, there's no mention about taking them into Israel, because the audience is not prepared to hear that. That's how the Meshech Chochmah wants. Okay. You know what? The other Rabbeinu B'chaya, I want to wait for next week when we read a few more verses. That's my class for tonight. If there are any comments or questions, I'll take them now.